I was just a junior assistant when I first met Daniel, my boss, a powerful man brought to his knees by an accident that left him in a wheelchair. Everyone left, but I stayed. I brought him coffee, held his hand through the pain, and read him reports late into the night when his mind wandered and his body gave up. Somewhere between the silence and struggle, he looked at me with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Marry me, Claire. You're the only one who stayed." I said yes, not because he was my boss, not because he was broken, but because I believed in the man behind the weakness. Then came the day he stood on his own, cheered, triumphant. He walked right past me, into the arms of Elise, the woman who once pitied his condition and now praised his strength. And just like that, I was erased from the story I helped write. But I didn't come this far just to be forgotten. Not this time. I remember the first time I saw Daniel Harrington after the accident. Not the broken version. No, the before. The man who walked into boardrooms like he owned the oxygen in them. Back then, I was just Claire Lewis, junior assistant, human footnote, the one who fetched coffee and knew how to fix the printer when it was too busy. But I noticed things, like how Daniel's smile never reached his eyes when he shook hands, or how his laugh cut off the second someone turned away. That day, the day before everything shattered, I was in the back of the room during the quarterly meeting, typing notes no one would read. Daniel stood at the head of the table, crisp navy suit, gold cufflinks glinting under the lights. He was talking about synergy and disruptive innovation, words that meant nothing but sounded expensive. The executives nodded like bobbleheads, even the ones who hated him. That's the thing about power. It doesn't need to be liked, just obeyed. And then there was Elise Carmichael, PR director, perched at his right hand like a jewelled accessory. Her laugh was a little too loud, her fingers brushing his sleeve a little too often. I watched her the way you watch a snake sunning itself on a rock. Beautiful, dangerous, utterly aware of both. She never looked at me. No one did. The meeting ended and Daniel strode out, Elise trailing behind him, her stilettos clicking like a metronome keeping time to his empire. I stayed to collect abandoned water bottles and crumpled agendas. My phone buzzed, a text from my mum asking if I'd remembered to pay my sister's tuition. Again, I swiped it away. That night it rained, not the gentle kind, the kind that lashes against windows like it's trying to get in. I was proofreading a press release, Elise's work but my job to tidy up, when the news alert popped up. CEO's car crash, Harrington media boss critical. The photo showed his totaled Bentley, the windshield a spiderweb of cracks, the rain blurring the flashing lights of the ambulances. I should have felt something. Horror, maybe. Or pity. Instead, I just thought, of course it was raining. The next morning, the office was a graveyard of hushed voices and sideways glances. Elise was nowhere to be seen. The board called an emergency meeting. I brought the coffee. And that's when I saw him, not the man from the boardroom. No, this was a ghost propped up in a hospital bed, tubes snaking from his arms, his skin the colour of old paper. The doctors said he might never walk again. The investors said nothing, but their silence was louder than a scream. I stood in the doorway holding a file nobody had asked for, watching the most powerful man in the room learn what it felt like to be powerless. And that's when I knew. This was my chance. I didn't visit Daniel out of kindness, let's be clear. I went because the board was already whispering about interim leadership, and I knew the vultures would pick his bones clean before his body even finished failing. Someone had to document the collapse. Might as well be me. His room was at the end of the hall, guarded by a weary nurse who barely glanced up when I walked in. And there he was. Daniel Harrington, the man who'd once fired an exec for serving him lukewarm coffee, now reduced to a tangle of wires and beeping machines. His eyes were closed, his famous jaw slack. For the first time, he looked ordinary. Then his eyelids flickered open. Dark, bloodshot, but sharp, still his. He took me in with the same detached scrutiny he'd once used on quarterly reports. "Claire," he rasped. Not "what are you doing here?" Not "thank you for coming." Just my name, like he was checking off a box. The doctor came in then, all practiced sympathy. "The spinal damage is severe," he said while Daniel stared at the ceiling. "Rehabilitation will be extensive." A diplomatic way of saying, you might never walk again. I watched Daniel's fingers twitch against the sheets. His left hand, the one that used to sign million-dollar deals with a flourish. Now it trembled, useless. That's when the first visitor arrived. Elise. She swept in wearing a cashmere wrap and the kind of perfume that costs more than my rent, her face arranged into perfect concern. "Daniel," she breathed, rushing to his side. He turned his head toward her like a flower to the sun. I saw it then, the flicker of relief in his eyes. The unspoken "you" came. And I saw something else too. The way Elise's gaze snagged on the wheelchair in the corner, the barely there recoil when the doctor mentioned catheters and long-term care. She stayed 20 minutes, made promises about being there and getting through this together, left her designer handbag on his tray table like a placeholder. She never came back. None of them did. Not the COO who'd called Daniel a mentor, not the fiancé who'd once posed with him in Forbes. Just me, the invisible assistant, showing up every day with black coffee and the financials he insisted on reviewing, even as his hands shook too badly to hold the pages. One evening, after a particularly brutal physical therapy session, he grabbed my wrist so suddenly I nearly dropped the files. His grip was weak, but his eyes burned. "Why are you still here?" I could have said, "Because it's my job." Could have lied and said, "Because I care." Instead, I smiled. "Someone has to remember who you were." The heart monitor skipped a beat. And that's when I knew. I had him. That's when the pain cut through the meds, when the reality of his broken body sank its teeth in and refused to let go. I'd sit by Daniel's bedside, watching sweat bead on his forehead as he fought through another wave of agony, his fingers clawing at the sheets like he could tear his way out of this nightmare. "You should scream," I told him once, handing him a glass of water. "It helps." He looked at me like I'd suggested he set himself on fire. "I don't scream." Of course he didn't. Daniel Harrington didn't beg, didn't break, not where anyone could see, but I saw. I saw the way his breath hitched when the nurses lifted him onto the bedpan, the way his jaw clenched when the doctors talked about realistic expectations, the way his eyes darkened every time Elise's name came up, which it did, often, in the form of floral arrangements sent by her assistant with impersonal notes like, "Wishing you a speedy recovery." 6 weeks in, the board stopped calling. 6 weeks in, his fiancée's Instagram showed her in St. Bart's, sipping champagne with some venture capitalist. 6 weeks in, Daniel started looking at me differently. Not with gratitude, no, that would have been too human. It was more like calculation. The same look he used to give spreadsheets before greenlighting a hostile takeover. Then came the night of the storm. The power flickered, casting the room in jagged shadows. Daniel had just finished another round of humiliating futile exercises, trying to move toes that wouldn't obey, legs that might as well have belonged to someone else. He was shaking with exhaustion, his hospital gown damp with sweat. I handed him a towel. He didn't take it, just stared at my hand like it held the answers to every question he was too proud to ask. And then, "Marry me." Not a question, a demand, a transaction. I laughed. "You're delirious." His fingers closed around my wrist, surprisingly strong. "I'm lucid." The monitors beeped faster. "You're the only one who didn't leave. The only one who sees me." His thumb brushed my pulse point. "That's worth something." The storm rattled the windows. Somewhere down the hall, a nurse laughed. I could have pulled away. Should have. But I'd spent my whole life waiting for someone to look at me, to need me, even if it was just because everyone else had walked away. So I leaned in, close enough to smell the antiseptic on his skin, the bitterness of his pain. "Say it again." His breath was warm against my lips. "Marry me, Claire." No ring, no romance, just two broken people making a deal in the dark. I kissed him instead of answering. That was answer enough. 3 months after the accident, Daniel moved his toes. 4 months he could sit up without screaming. 6 months and he was standing, shaking, sweating, his knuckles white around the parallel bars, but standing. The doctors beamed. The nurses applauded. The board members who'd written him off suddenly remembered their unwavering support. I watched it all from the corner of the physical therapy room, my fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that never seemed to stay warm. Daniel never looked at me during these sessions. Not when he took his first step. Not when the lead neurologist declared his progress miraculous. His eyes stayed fixed on the mirror ahead, on the reflection of the man he used to be, the man he was clawing his way back to, one agonizing inch at a time. But at night, when the cameras were off and the sycophants had gone home, he'd reach for me in the dark. His hands, still clumsy with nerve damage, would fumble with the buttons of my blouse. His mouth, still slurring occasionally from the pain meds, would press against my throat like he was trying to brand me. It wasn't love, it wasn't even affection. It was ownership. I let him have it. Let him think he still held all the power. Because while he was busy relearning how to walk, I was learning other things, like how to access files I wasn't supposed to see, how to recognize the particular flush in Daniel's cheeks when he lied, how Elise's perfume still lingered in his office long after her courtesy visits ended. The first time I caught them together, it was almost funny. I'd come to bring Daniel his lunch. He'd been craving these terrible deli sandwiches no nutritionist would approve, and found his office door slightly ajar. Through the crack, I saw Elise perched on his desk, her skirt hiked up around her thighs, Daniel's hands gripping her hips like he was afraid she'd vanish if he let go. She saw me first. Our eyes met in the reflection of the window behind them. She didn't stop, didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Just smirked and leaned down to whisper something in Daniel's ear that made him groan. I set the sandwich bag quietly on the floor outside and walked away. That night, Daniel came home to our penthouse. His penthouse, really, though he'd started calling it ours after the engagement, and kissed me like nothing had happened. His lips tasted like Elise's mint gum. "Big day, tomorrow," he murmured against my temple. "The board wants to discuss my official return." I smiled up at him, all wide eyes and devotion. "I am so proud of you." His phone buzzed. A text from Elise lighting up the screen. "Can't wait to celebrate properly tomorrow night." I pretended not to see. Daniel pretended not to hide it. We were both so very good at pretending. Harrington Media's glass ceiling showpiece was packed with holding their phones aloft, greedy for the perfect shot. A red carpet had been rolled out, Elise's idea, no doubt, leading from the elevator to the temporary stage. Cameras from every major network lined the perimeter. The air smelled like expensive perfume and anticipation. I stood off to the side where assistants always stand, holding Daniel's backup speech in my hands. The one he'd made me rewrite 7 times. The one he'd never need, because the teleprompter would work perfectly, and Elise would be hovering just off stage to catch him if he stumbled. The elevator doors opened. Silence. Then, applause. Deafening, rapturous applause as Daniel stepped forward. No cane, no wheelchair, just a slight hesitation in his left foot that most people wouldn't notice. He wore a custom suit that hid the remaining braces. his hair perfectly styled to cover the scars. The cameras flashed like lightning, catching every angle of his triumphant smile. He walked down that red carpet like a conquering hero and walked right past me. Not a glance, not a pause. As if I were part of the furniture, another piece of the scenery from his difficult chapter. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, executives jostling to clap him on the back. Someone handed him a microphone. Someone else, Elise, adjusted his lapel with proprietary fingers. I watched his lips move, heard the words gratitude and second chance. Watched Elise blink back tears for the cameras as he praised her unwavering support. My fingers tightened around the useless speech. The edges of the paper bit into my palms. Then, a sound. Small, almost imperceptible under the applause. The creak of leather as Daniel shifted his weight. The nearly silent gasp he'd made for months when the pain flared. His left knee was buckling, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. Elise didn't. The crowd didn't, but I did. For one wild second, our eyes met across the sea of faces. His were wide, with something almost like panic. Mine, I'm sure, showed nothing at all. The moment passed. He recovered. The speech continued. Later, at the celebration dinner, someone finally remembered to introduce me. "Ah, yes, Claire," Daniel said, his arm around Elise's waist. "My assistant during my convalescence." The way he said it made it sound like a disease. I sipped my champagne and smiled. "Just happy to see you back where you belong." That night, I packed my things from the penthouse while Daniel was still at the after-party, left the engagement ring on his pillow, took every file, every email, every recording I'd made over the past 9 months. The door didn't even make a sound when it closed behind me. The first article appeared in Business Today 2 days after I left. Harrington Media CEO announces engagement to PR director Elise Carmichael. She never gave up on me. There was a photo of them at some charity gala, Daniel's arm possessively around her waist, her left hand strategically placed to show off the ring. My ring. The one he'd bought 3 days after walking past me in the atrium. The article mentioned me exactly once. A company assistant helped care for Harrington during his recovery. I drank an entire bottle of Pinot Noir that night and burned every draft of the speech I'd written for him in my kitchen sink. The flames turned the words to ash in seconds, far faster than he'd erased me. The office was worse. My security badge still worked, a small oversight in their hurry to rewrite history. I walked past reception on Monday morning like nothing had changed, only to find Elise's assistant boxing up my desk. "Claire!" She froze, a stack of my notebooks in her hands. Daniel said, "Relax." I plucked my favourite pen from the box. "Keep the rest." The ball pen was silent as I walked to Daniel's office. Through the glass walls, I could see him laughing with Elise, his hand resting on the back of her neck, exactly where mine used to rest during his worst nights of pain. He looked up when I entered. The laughter died. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other. Then Elise turned, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Claire, how unexpected." "I forgot something." I held up the flash drive with all my personal files and the copied folders of his offshore account records. "Don't worry, I cleared it with HR." Daniel's eyes tracked the drive. "You shouldn't be here." "You're right." I dropped it into my pocket. "But then, you shouldn't still be using the same passwords from your hospital bed." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Elise stood, her perfume suddenly cloying. "I think you should leave." I was already at the door. "Oh, I am. But first," I turned back to Daniel, "the board meeting next week, the one where you present the Q3 numbers, you might want to double-check the Singapore subsidiary reports." His face went perfectly blank. the same expression he'd worn when the doctors told him he might never walk again. I smiled, just trying to help. The elevator doors closed on Elise's furious whisper and Daniel's choked silence. Outside, the sun was blinding. I breathed in the exhaust-filled air and checked my phone. One new email from an anonymous account with the subject line, "For when you're ready." I hit delete. Not yet. The first time I truly understood the depth of Daniel's betrayal, it wasn't because of Elise. It wasn't even because of the ring, or the way my name had been scrubbed from every company memo about his recovery. It was because of a fucking coffee order. I was sitting in a cafe across from Harrington Media's headquarters, one of those pretentious artisan places Daniel used to send me to for his double ristretto, half foam, 180-degree oat milk latte with exactly 3 drops of vanilla. The barista, a girl with purple streaks in her hair, who'd served me every morning for 9 months, slid a cup toward a man in a Harrington security badge. "1 black coffee, no sugar," she said. The exact order I'd brought Daniel every single day in the hospital. The security guy frowned. This is for Mr. Harrington. He doesn't drink." "Tell him it's from Claire," the barista interrupted, rolling her eyes. "He'll know." The man shrugged and left. I sat there, stirring sugar into my own coffee, until the spoon nearly wore a hole through the cup. That was the moment it truly hit me. Daniel hadn't just replaced me, he'd erased every habit, every preference, every fucking ritual I'd memorized during those months of playing nursemaid. The coffee had never been about taste. It had been about control. And now, he couldn't even stomach the reminder. My phone buzzed. A news alert. Harrington Media CFO resigns amid Singapore subsidiary probe. I smiled. That night, I finally opened the anonymous email. No text. Just attachments, bank transfers, offshore account numbers, and a series of time-stamped photos showing Elise meeting with a known corporate raider 2 days before Daniel's accident. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidences didn't explain the $2 million payment to an LLC registered in her mother's name. I poured myself a drink, Daniel's favourite scotch, the one he'd taught me to appreciate during late nights reviewing contracts, and started drafting emails. Not to journalists, not to the board, to Elise. Subject, your wedding registry. I noticed you registered for China. Smart. You'll need something to eat off when they freeze your accounts. P.S. Tell Daniel to check his calendar. The SEC doesn't do surprise parties, but they do love subpoenas. I hit send. Then I waited. It took exactly 17 minutes for my burner phone to ring. Daniel's voice was barely recognizable. "What do you want?" I swirled the scotch in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "Oh, I don't know. A public apology? Your resignation? Maybe just..." I let the silence stretch. "The satisfaction of watching you realize you never should have let me see you weak." The line went dead. I finished the drink in one swallow. The game was on. I spread the documents across my kitchen table. Bank statements, encrypted emails, surveillance photos, each one a thread in the noose I was weaving. The anonymous source had delivered everything I needed. Too perfectly, too conveniently. That should have worried me. But desperation makes for reckless allies, and I was long past caring about motives. The first move was subtle, a whisper in the right ear. I met Richard Cole, Harrington Media's most ambitious board member, at an obscure wine bar downtown. He didn't ask how I'd gotten his private calendar, didn't question why I'd chosen him, just swirled his Bordeaux and said, "You realise if this backfires, you'll disappear faster than a junior exec during restructuring." I slid the folder across the table. "And if it doesn't, you'll be CEO by Christmas." Inside, proof Daniel had been siphoning funds from the Singapore subsidiary for years. Not just embezzlement, tax evasion, falsified reports, enough to trigger a federal investigation. The kicker, Elise's signature on half the transfers. Richard didn't smile. but his fingers lingered on the papers a second too long. Phase 2 required finesse. I created an encrypted email chain between concerned employee and 3 major journalists. Attached the most damning documents, just enough to whet appetites. Then I waited. The first article dropped at 6:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, prime time for financial news. Irregularities found in Harrington Media's Asian subsidiaries. By noon, the stock had plummeted 18%. By 3 p.m, Daniel was on CNBC denying everything, sweat beading at his hairline despite the studio's Arctic AC. Elise wasn't with him. I knew where she'd be. Her penthouse terrace overlooked Central Park, all glass and sharp edges, just like her. She was pacing when I let myself in, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what legal says. We need to..." She froze when she saw me. I held up the spare key she'd given me months ago, back when we were pretending to be friends. "Miss me?" Her eyes darted to the security panel. "Go ahead," I said. "Call them. But first..." I tossed my phone onto the couch. Bloomberg's latest alert glowed on the screen. SEC launches probe into Harrington Media following whistleblower claims. Elise's perfect facade cracked. "What did you do?" I smiled. "What you taught me. I leveraged every advantage." The real masterpiece came next. While Daniel scrambled to contain the financial fallout, while Elise shredded documents in panic, I quietly uploaded every piece of evidence to a cloud drive. Tagged it with all the right keywords, set it to auto-release to every major news outlet if any accident befell me. Insurance policies are so tedious, until they're the only thing keeping you alive. As I walked out, I paused at her wet bar and poured 2 fingers of her ridiculously expensive gin. Drank it in one go. "By the way," I said, setting the glass down precisely on the watermark it had left. "Congrats on the engagement. Should I send a gift or just wait for the divorce filing?" The door didn't slam behind me. Revenge is quieter than that. You never know who else is standing in the flames. The SEC investigation hit Harrington Media like a freight train, freezing assets, tanking stock prices, sending board members scrambling like rats from a sinking ship. Daniel's face was plastered across every financial news outlet, his once pristine reputation reduced to words like alleged and impropriety. Elise had gone radio silent, her social media scrubbed clean, her penthouse dark. I should have been satisfied. Then the text started. "Unknown number, you missed something." A grainy surveillance photo followed, me entering Richard Cole's office the night before the first leak. "Unknown number. How much did he pay you?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't Daniel's style, too subtle, too patient. The next message was a video clip. Elise, sitting across from Richard in a private dining room, her manicured fingers sliding a flash drive across the table. Unknown number. Everyone's playing someone. The room tilted. All this time I thought I'd been pulling the strings. But the anonymous source who'd fed me documents, the perfectly timed leaks, none of it had been my move. I'd just been another piece on the board. I stared at the screen, the truth settling like ice in my veins. Richard had used me to take down Daniel. Elise had used Richard to save herself. And now someone was watching me. The Harrington Media stock ticker became a funeral march. CNBC played it on loop. HMT shares bleeding red, free-falling 40% in a single trading session after the SEC filed its preliminary injunction. Analysts used phrases like catastrophic governance failure and systemic fraud. Pundits who'd once fawned over Daniel now tripped over themselves to condemn him. I watched it all from a corner booth at a Wall Street dive bar, nursing a whiskey neat. The bartender kept glancing at me, not out of recognition, but because I was the only one not staring at the screens. Then the notification buzzed in my pocket. Breaking: Harrington Media. Board votes unanimously to remove Daniel Harrington as CEO. The details were delicious. Richard Cole named interim CEO. Elise's name conspicuously absent from the press release. And Daniel? Stripped of security access before he'd even cleared out his office. My phone lit up with an incoming call. Blocked number. I answered. Silence. Then Daniel's voice, raw with something I'd never heard before. Fear. You win. Ice clinked in my glass. No, Daniel, I just stopped losing. The line went dead. Across the bar, the TV switched to footage of Daniel exiting the Harrington building, mobbed by reporters. His tie was crooked, his eyes hollow. A single image captured it perfectly. His reflection fractured in the company's glass doors as they swung shut behind him. I left cash on the table. Phase 1 was complete. Elise Carmichael had built her career on controlling narratives. So, when the first blind item dropped on page 6, which fallen media prince's fiancé has been cozying up to federal investigators? She should have seen the storm coming. I didn't send the tip myself. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I let Richard Cole's ambitious young protégé discover the documents I'd carefully misfiled in the Harrington media server. Elise's secret meetings with prosecutors, her carefully negotiated immunity deal, the same deal that required throwing Daniel under the bus. The internet did the rest. By noon, #Elise the Rat was trending. By 3 p.m, her face was photoshopped onto a sinking lifeboat memes. The piece de resistance? A leaked voicemail where her honeyed voice purred, "Darling, we both know loyalty is just the price people pay when they have no other options." She'd left it for Daniel the night before his arrest. I watched from a cafe across from her building as she stormed out, sunglasses hiding nothing from the paparazzi's lenses. Her perfect hair was mussed, her couture dress wrinkled. For the first time, Elise Carmichael looked human. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Satisfied? I typed back, not even close. Because the real masterpiece wasn't Elise's downfall. It was making her and Daniel destroy each other. I didn't need to lift another finger. The dominoes fell with perfect precision. Daniel, stripped of everything, sat in his empty penthouse. The bank had already begun foreclosure proceedings, staring at the same 4 walls where he'd once promised me forever. Elise, barred from every reputable PR firm in the city, was reduced to begging old contacts for favours that never came. Then came my masterstroke. A single envelope delivered to each of them. No return address, just a date, time, and coordinates. The same waterfront bar where Daniel had first introduced Elise as his rock during recovery. They arrived separately, of course. From my rented convertible across the street, I watched through binoculars as Daniel's hollowed-out frame slumped into a patio chair. Elise appeared minutes later, her once impeccable posture now defensive, coiled. Their voices carried across the quiet marina. "You set me up. You used me first." The accusations flew like shrapnel. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. Their body language said everything. The way Daniel's hands trembled when Elise mentioned the immunity deal, how her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms when he snarled about her betrayal. My phone buzzed, a notification from the SEC. Richard Cole had just been named permanent CEO. Attached was his first official email to staff. Harrington media will emerge stronger from this chapter. I smiled, starting the car. Let them tear each other apart. I had a new life to build. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office, 30 floors above Manhattan, in the very building where Harrington media had once reigned supreme. The view was better from here. Or maybe it just looked that way because I was the one holding all the cards now. Richard Cole had kept his word. A discreet transfer of shares, a new consultancy position created just for me, Claire Lewis, Executive Vice President of Strategic Development. The title rolled off the tongue with the same satisfying weight as a blade slipping between ribs. My assistant, a bright-eyed Columbia grad who reminded me of myself 3 years ago, knocked tentatively at the door. "Miss Lewis, there's a delivery for you?" The box on her desk was small, unmarked, the kind that usually held jewellery. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was a single key to Daniel's old penthouse. Attached was a note in handwriting I'd recognise anywhere. "You forgot something." I laughed, actually laughed, because of course he'd do this. This pathetic, transparent attempt at, what? A reminder, a threat, as if I cared about that hollowed-out shell of his former life. But then I turned the key over. Engraved on the other side, nearly worn away, "For emergencies." The safety deposit box key. The one he'd shown me exactly once, drunk on painkillers, whispering about offshore accounts even the SEC hadn't uncovered. My fingers closed around cold metal. Richard's voice came from the doorway. "Problem?" I pocketed the key. "Just an old ghost trying to haunt me." He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. You realise he's desperate. The FBI froze everything. That key probably opens an empty box. "Probably," I smiled. "But Richard..." I waited until his eyes met mine. "You, of all people, should know. I never leave loose ends." The security footage would later show a woman matching my description entering the bank that night. The safety deposit box would be found empty the next morning. And Daniel Harrington? He jumped from the balcony of his foreclosure apartment 2 days later. The tabloids called it a tragedy. The business section called it inevitable. I called it justice. As for the $27 million that mysteriously appeared in a Cayman account under my mother's maiden name, let's just say some ghosts are worth keeping.